Well, hey guys, it's Jessica Leichtweisz and Dr. Catherine May. We're on here tonight. We paired together to create the Behavior Bosses, which you guys probably have already heard of if you've been following our YouTube channel. We've been doing webinars going over 5 mock questions, the entire 5th edition task list. We did a webinar last week on task list G. We had a tech fail, so we lost the recording, but we're re-recording it for you guys. And if you were on that webinar, you will get the recording. And if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube, we're going to go right through these questions. So if you want to take time to read them and to answer them, you can simply pause the video. And if you have any questions about them, just drop them in the chat and we'll answer them for you. So let's get started. Question 1. Laura wants her student Carl to increase the amount of time that he remains in his seat. Laura has conducted a preference assessment and has identified hot Cheerios as a possible reinforcer. When Carl remains in his seat during morning work time, he is given a bag of hot Cheerios at lunch. The amount of time that Carl remains in his seat is not increasing. Which of the following might have contributed to Carl's behavior of remaining in his seat not increasing? A, Carl does not like hot Cheerios. B, Carl is satiated on hot Cheetos. Carl is unable to remain seated for a long period of time. And the response to reinforcement delay is too long. So if you need time to answer this, you can pause the video, but I'm going to jump right into the explanation. So when we're looking at a question like this, what do we know right off the bat? Well, the first thing we know right off the bat is that the reinforcer is not working, right? Hot Cheetos is intended to be a reinforcer, but it's not working. If we want to figure out why it's not working, we need to really look at the question, because the truth is that any of these things, any of these answers can be an explanation for why a reinforcer wouldn't work, right? The person doesn't want it, the person's satiated in it. Maybe C's a little different, but really these are all valid reasons why that they could work. So what we want to really do when we're dissecting a question is look at what the question is saying and asking what the scenario is bringing up and making sure that we're not adding anything to it. So in this example, it doesn't say that Carl doesn't like hot Cheetos, right? It says he's given Cheetos at lunch. Doesn't even really say whether he ate them or not, or whether he wanted them or not. So there's really nothing in the question indicating that he didn't like hot Cheetos. The same thing with being satiated on hot Cheetos. There's nothing in the question indicating that. Now, Carl is unable to remain seated for a long period of time. That would be essentially insinuating that the behavior itself is inappropriate, right? So that it's not that the reinforcement isn't working, it's that the behavior itself is not an appropriate goal. And again, there's really nothing in this situation that's discussing that. What is in this situation is when he's provided the reinforcement in contrast with when he's engaging in the behavior. So if we read this again, it says that when Carl remains in his seat during morning work time, he is given a bag of hot Cheetos at lunch. Now, there are some cases for mature learners when reinforcement can be delayed, right? We know if we're using self-management, we might use self-reinforcement and delay reinforcement. But for the most part, overwhelmingly, it's safe to say reinforcement must occur right after a behavior in order for it to be effective and for the learner to connect the reinforcer to the actual behavior. So in this case, your answer is going to be D. The response to reinforcement delay is too long. Essentially, waiting to lunch to get the Cheetos is either making it so Carl doesn't realize it's a reinforcer for sitting in his work time, or he's just not making that connection because it's too long of a delay. So that's your answer with this one. And Dr. Katie can introduce herself and she can go over question 2.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Katie May. I am the owner and founder of ABA Mindset, and I collabed with Jessica Leichtweisz so that we can create the behavior bosses and create awesome webinars like this for you guys. So I'm going to jump right into the second question here. Mrs. King uses a classroom money system. When students engage in appropriate behavior, she gives them classroom dollars. Students are able to buy items from the classroom store with the dollars they have earned. Mrs. King's classroom dollars are A, generalized conditioned reinforcers, B, primary reinforcers, C, secondary reinforcers, or D, conditioned reinforcers. So I'm going to jump right in with the explanation, and the correct answer is A, your generalized condition reinforcers. So when we're looking at this question, we're looking at the type of exam questions where we're saying to ourselves, well, why is it not a condition reinforcer? Why is it not a secondary reinforcer? So there are many questions just like this example where just because they are very similar, or you see how it could possibly fall under maybe secondary reinforcers or condition reinforcers, you want to look for the best answer. And when you're looking for the best answer, we're looking for the most specific answer. Okay, so when it comes to classroom dollars or money, praise, high fives, anything along the lines that are completely generalized to an audience that is much larger than just being in the classroom, right? If you see somebody in the street and you smile at them or you give them a high five, they already know that that's some sort of reinforcement. They know that that is a positive thing, makes them feel good, and they're going to go ahead and give you that high five. So your best answer for this question is A. And the reason why we're not picking a primary reinforcer is because a primary reinforcer or those reinforcers we're born with, right? Like water, sleep, sex, right? Things that we are naturally reinforced. And our secondary and condition reinforcers, we learned because they're paired with those primary reinforcers, and we do learn that they become reinforcers. But even more so, if we're talking about money, high five, smiles, like I previously stated, those are generalized because they generalize across a bigger audience, across many settings, and in many situations.
All right.
Jessica's going to take it away with question 3.
Yeah, so let's look at question 3 here. It says, Leslie is a BCBA working with a 5-year-old client named Ollie. She is working with Ollie on selecting different sports cards from a field of 5. She places the cards in front of him and asks him to pick basketball. He does not pick a card. She begins another trial and places the card in front of him again, rotating the order. He does not pick a card. She begins another trial, rotates the card again, and this time pushes the basketball card closer to him. Ollie picks up the basketball card. Leslie used A, response prompt, B, stimulus prompt, C, gestural prompt, and D, visual prompt. So this is another one of these questions where we're going to be looking for the best answer here. So let's dissect what all of these things are. A response prompt is when the person who the therapist, right, is acting on the response or the learner. So this is going to be when you're modeling a behavior, when you're physically guiding someone to engage in a behavior, or providing a verbal direction. So you're not really looking at the stimulus, you're really working directly with the response. In contrast, a stimulus prompt is going to be when you're really making the stimulus more salient. And you can do that by either using visuals, by either moving the stimulus, or by doing a redundancy prompt, which is again where you're making it more salient. So let's look at what some of these things are. So C, right, is a gestural prompt. A gestural prompt is a type of stimulus prompt. That would be when you're pointing to the stimulus in order to make it more salient. And then a visual prompt would be, again, that you're holding up some sort of visual that makes the stimulus more salient. So in this example here, we don't see a gesture, we don't see a visual prompt. This is actually a movement stimulus prompt, right? He's moving the stimulus closer in order to make it more obvious what the correct answer is. So the answer here is going to be B, a stimulus prompt. Now it could be, he could have dealt with the proximity, which it doesn't tell us about here. That still would be a stimulus prompt. Again, he could have maybe circled the correct answer. That still would have been a stimulus prompt. But in this example, we're not seeing that. We're really just seeing the fact that it is a movement prompt, which is a type of stimulus prompt.
All right, guys, question 4. Joanne, a BCBA, was working with her client, Lily, a 5-year-old child with ASD. Lily was learning how to dress herself, learn colors, learn shapes, and sorting colors. As Lily was sorting colors, she continuously put the green cube in the blue bucket. Joanne decided to implement a teaching procedure that involved hand over hand to direct Lily to put the green cube in the green bucket. This procedure guided Lily and did not allow her to make the mistake of putting the green cube in the blue bucket. This exemplifies A, errorless teaching, B, least to most prompting, C, graduated guidance, or D, response prompting. Our best answer here is going to be errorless teaching. She used a hand-over-hand procedure to directly put the green cube in the green bucket. That means she was also, the scenario also states that this procedure did not allow Lily to make the mistake of putting the green cube in the blue bucket. So you want to remember, with errorless teaching, also known as errorless learning, you're simply showing or prompting the client how to do the correct skill by not letting them make the mistake of doing the incorrect skill. Now let's look at some of the other options. Least to most prompting. This is when we are teaching a skill using the least amount of prompting and working our way up to a more intrusive prompt. So that would not apply with this scenario here, as we did use a hand-over-hand prompt, which is a more intrusive prompt, as opposed to just maybe pointing, looking, gestural, and so forth. Graduated guidance. This is when we're physically guiding the client, and we're doing so in a graduated manner, right? So maybe I have my hands on the client's shoulders, then I'm moving down to the client's elbows, then maybe down to the client's wrist, to the point where I actually step away and allow the client to engage in the skill independently. I'm still there as a practitioner, ready to prompt if prompts are needed, but there is that period of time where they are left to try to engage in the skill independently. So you're graduating the guidance and also allowing them to then engage in that skill set. And lastly, we have response prompting. And remember, with response prompting, we have modeling, a verbal prompt, or physical guidance. Now, although we did use a bit of physical guidance in this scenario, we want to make sure we are applying our best answer by utilizing everything the scenario gives us. So it didn't just stop at hand over hand. It gave us more information and said it did not allow Lily to make the mistake of putting the green cube in the blue bucket. So your best answer there is errorless teaching, because that mistake was not permitted. And you do want to be mindful, one of the tricks with errorless teaching, we don't allow them to make that mistake, but we also don't teach them what happens when there is a mistake. So that's another part that you would have to teach after using errorless teaching.
All right, perfect. But let's look at question 5. It says here, Janet is your client, and she's learning how to put her hair in a ponytail. You teach her to pull her hair on top of her head and tie a bow. She later puts her hair in a ponytail by pulling her hair together lower on the back and tying a knot, and pulling her hair on the side of her head and tying a double knot. This scenario exemplifies A, response maintenance, B, response generalization, C, stimulus generalization, and D, overgeneralization. So let's look at all 4 of these and then see if we can figure out what the answer is. So response maintenance. So what is maintenance? Maintenance is just the ability to maintain a skill over time. So you taught the skill, time passed, and they can still do the skill. There's nothing referencing time here, so that's not the answer. Then we have response generalization. Well, response generalization and stimulus generalization, these are often confused. And so response generalization is when the response changes. Now, in stimulus generalization, you are changing the stimulus. You're either changing the person you're doing it with, the object you're using, or you're changing the location, the setting, right? All 3 of those things are stimulus generalization. Some people teach, well, if there's more than one response, it's response generalization. If there's more than one stimulus, it's stimulus generalization. That is not 100% always true, because sometimes the stimulus can actually change, the stimuli can change, and it's still response generalization. And the example would be if I was writing my name, if I was doing that with finger paint versus doing it with a paintbrush versus doing it with a dot marker versus doing it with a pencil, right? So the stimulus is changing, but the way in which I'm engaging with that stimulus is also changing. Or if I'm going to clean the floor with a broom, and then I'm going to clean the floor with a vacuum, and I'm going to clean the floor with a mop, right? Those are all functional equivalent behaviors of where I'm actually cleaning, but the stimulus is changing, but what I do with that stimulus is changing. So when you're the better way to dissect the answer between is something response generalization or stimulus generalization is the response changing? If the response is changing and it's functional equivalent, right, it's leading to the same thing, in this case, her hair being put up, then it is going to be your answer. So here, right, she said first she puts her hair in a ponytail by tying it in her back, right? So that's one way of doing it. And then obviously I'm doing something different with my hand if I'm going to tie it on the side of my head, right? So then we know for sure that the response is changing. It's response generalization. When you get these questions, if you are confused between response generalization and stimulus generalization, there are two questions you have to ask yourself in order to determine if it's stimulus generalization. Number one, is the stimulus changing? In this example, there's no indication of that. But if there was an indication of that, it's okay, are you doing the same thing with the stimulus, right? If I just said I'm going to write my name with a pencil versus a pen, yes, the stimulus is changing and I'm doing the exact same thing. So it is just stimulus generalization. But if I were to be engaging in completely different behaviors, does the behavior look different? It is going to be response generalization, even if the stimulus is changing. So I just wanted to make sure that you were clear on that because it's a very important distinction and leads to a lot of people getting these questions wrong on mock questions and mock exams. So then overgeneralization, what does that mean? That's just essentially when there's faulty stimulus control, right? So this is really happens often when it's like one of the first responses a child's learning. So let's just say, for example, a child, the first thing you're teaching a child is that when they to clap their hands. So you say clap their hands, they start clapping their hands, they get delivered a reinforcer. And now they just walk around clapping their hands, expecting a reinforcer, right? They're overgeneralizing clapping their hands because it wasn't really actually connected to them for the SD of clap your hands. It had faulty stimulus control. So overgeneralization is when children or learners are engaging in a behavior outside of the context of the SD that it was intending to be reinforced with. So that would be what overgeneralization is. And again, that is not in this scenario. So I really hope that this has been helpful for you guys going through these 5 questions of task list G. Like I said, Dr. Catherine and I put together a 5th edition task list course for you. So if you found this helpful, you will certainly find that helpful as well. We go through the entire task list, not just G. This is actually the largest section now on the exam. It's 20% of your exam. So certainly make sure you know this. If you really had any struggles at all with this section, I highly recommend you get that course because you cannot pass your exam if you don't understand G with the amount that it is assigned to, the value it's assigned to on your exam. So if you want to check out that course, you can check it out at tasklist5.com. And anything you want to add, Katie, about why we put the course together to help really everyone be successful?
I just want to say we put a lot of heart and soul into it, a lot of great content. You guys check it out. If you like this, very similar. We have videos to download, mini mocks to download, notes to download, everything you need to be successful on this exam. And we are here to support you the whole way through. So take a look, tasklist5.com.
Yes. All right. Thanks, guys, so much. And we'll see you for our next video and hopefully in our course as well.